Okay, the question is on cardiolipin. Cardiolipin is likely to facilitate which of the following processes? And what you see are four answer choices that all have something to do with electron transport in the mitochondria. So take a look at the answers. Think about what it is. And the answer is choice C, NADH, acting as a reducing agent towards FAD. So you don't see the electron transport chain in the passage or the question, but what you should do is have a visual image and understand the logic of what is going on. And you may come to something that looks like this. So we know cardiolipin is part of what's called the respirasome. And although we typically think of electron transport as being made of four different complexes, the reality is that they're all kind of bunched up together into what's called a respirasome. And electron transport means that electrons are being transferred from one entity to another down a chain through hydride anion. That is, hydride anion is how redox occurs, and what happens is that when H with two electrons gives up its electrons, and it's stuck with a proton, and we'll see what happens to that in a moment. So you look on the bottom left, you see NADH in electron transport center 1 gives up its electrons and makes NAD+, and then what happens is that those electrons go to FAD to make FADH2, and complex number 2 is in the TCA cycle. It's called Succinate Dehydrogenase. Notice that it's on the other side in the matrix as opposed to the reaction center 1. Look at the location of the 2. And what happens then, as the electrons get transferred, what happens is that the protons get kicked into the inner membrane space, and as you continually go along the electron transport chain, you build up a lot of protons, making a huge gradient of potential energy that's coupled with the chemical energy required to make ATP via ADP. That is the ATP synthase. So then here's an example of what occurs with FAD to FADH2, as well as the quinones on the bottom. And what you can see is that there's a redox reaction through the transfer of electrons. So study those closely and notice that on FADH2, you have 2 additional hydrogens that have been added to the molecule. That's shown on the right. Now, every time electrons get transferred in electron transport, you start from one high energy level and you go down to another one. So what's happening is that NADH has a high electron transfer potential, and then it gives it to FAD, and then FAD gives it up to quinones, and then you ultimately go down and you have the terminal acceptor oxygen going to water. Every step has a negative delta G because it's spontaneous, and we can write that in more physical chemical terms of what's called electron volts, or E0. And what you see here is oxidants and redox that has electron volt potentials assigned to it. And what you should remember is that there's a formula called delta G equals negative NFE, where we see here is E0 naught, this is standard conditions. And if you write out the half reactions, what you notice that in order to get a spontaneous reaction, you have to have a delta E that's positive, and that's what occurs between NADH and FAD. Come check us out at medpathway.com.